Someone wants to know what authoritarian neoliberalism is going to look like. And I would say China is a good example. Brazil. Letting boat people drown in the Mediterranean. I mean, it's all happening, you know. The apocalypse already has happened. It's just not evenly distributed. Singapore is a very good example, yes. But mostly it's going to be about paring around the edges. It's going to be about creating new borders and liminal spaces that can be negotiated violently. Because for the length of American history, America was able to export its most dysfunctional social pathologies onto its border regions. And it was always pushing out that way and able to push them out that way, and that's why they never had to confront them. That's why we never had a real socialist movement in this country, one of the big reasons. But now that we've hit all borders, now that we've hit the edge of space, we are now having to reinscribe borders to find a new liminal space for maximal violence, where citizens are allowed to carry out the maximum amount of violence, and the people subject to their violence are not part of the conceived of group of right-bearing citizens. It's a Gambin stuff. You know what I'm talking about. The homo sauceur. And we have those at the border now, and those borders will just be increased. They will become other places. They will probably become distributed within the United States, around cities probably, specific areas of where the cataclysm is hitting most direly. Places attacked by global warming, flooding, consistent wildfires, desertification, urban areas that are where there's the cycle of police violence and response is made permanent. Right now, it waxes away. It's it's now getting compressed. The time from think of the time it took to get from so that you got Mike Brown to Baltimore, and now we've got from George Floyd 3 months later. The violence is going to go up, which means the cycle is going to speed up, which means the intervals are going to get shorter, and eventually it just becomes a permanent condition. And that's a new border. That's a new internal border where you get to exercise maximal violence. And the reason that this isn't fascism is because there is still that social continuum within that area, the places beyond those borders. That's still the same atomized social slurry of consumers basically being free to consume that we have now. It will be functionally identical. There will not be marching jackboots in the streets. There's not going to be a new flag with a weird symbol, a weird rune on it. There's not going to be jackboots. There's not going to be theater. There's not going to be this frisson of apocalypse, of revelation of the truth of the whole condition. And for the leftists, the validation of their worldview. I have always said that America was fascist, and now I have been proven correct. That moment, which is, I think, undergirding a lot of the fantasy projection of American fascism, that won't happen. I highly, highly doubt it. What you will have is the border regions within and at the edge where violence is maximally applied, and then you will have America, where we're doing TikToks or whatever goes after TikTok, and we're arguing over the problematic content of Aquaman versus Bernie Getz. No, Gilead, what are you talking about? Oh my God! No, it's just like this, only more people are dying, and there are fewer people who are still living our absurdly inflated consumer standard of living at the very end of the global supply chain. Do you understand the distinction? I think that I guess what I find most risible about the fascist framing is that it seems to me to be at a certain level a fantasy, something that deeply at a level, I mean, not in terms of their morals, you know, they are horrified by fascism and want to defeat it. And in fact, the fantasy of fascism is what gives their actions romance and power to them, and it allows them to expend orgone along the axis of politics. It's the horribleness of that possibility. And then if you talk about it a lot and say it's coming, its occurrence is a validation. And I feel like that means that you're not looking at reality. That means that you are abstracting. And I just have to, like, as a general rule, as a rubric, I could look at somebody who's fixated on fascism and say, this person is, their eye isn't on the ball. And so they're going to be more likely. And haven't you noticed, by the way, that people the most fixated on fascism and calling what we're in fascism are also the most committed to things like theatrical, demonstrative, non-organized political action to replace real, either electoral or labor activism and organization. Like spectacular demonstrations of anti-fascist sentiment. And that's because they think we're at a level of social development that we are not. We need to organize way more people. Getting people needs to be the only question. Sorting people has to come later. These people want to sort. Remember that tweet I wrote you about? The tweet that said, hey, they'll either call up the mayor and tell him to get rid of racism, which, wow, it's so nice that they could do that. Or they'll go and become a Stormfront editor and get a gun and become a fucking militia member. And that's not good. You don't want that to happen to somebody who's like not engaged. You want to minimize that. But no, if your goal is sorting people into good and bad, then you want that to happen. I'm saying we cannot be sorting. We need to be organizing everybody who has any genuine axis of alienation, that is aware of capitalism, that is aware of their misery being connected to the system of the economy. That they have not been captured by fantasies of like racism being the cause of all evil, or Q people thinking that it's Hollywood pedophiles or Jews or whatever right-wing fantasy you need to square the reality of living under somebody else's design in a free country. If you're aware at all that there is a class component to your immiseration, then you have to be engaged with. And of course, that's going to make people uncomfortable, but that discomfort gets edged out through actual behavior together. But it will never get etched out in the phantom realm of online, where all disagreement has now been defined as, or can be defined as, abuse. How many people think being disagreed with is abusing someone? Now, if you really thought that in your day-to-day behavior, you wouldn't be able to function. You don't really think that. Online, your fantasy life can sustain that belief, and you can use it to batter down everyone you're interacting with to do what you want them to do. Now, if you were acting politically in the real world, over time, your ability to do that would be blunted against everyone else's desire to get something done. And you would have to accommodate it. Also, I must say, there are also people who are genuinely like very racist and committed to racism, or deeply misogynistic and hostile to women, or wildly reactionary about some group of people, and that they can't get rid of that. Well, they can maintain that all they want online as they duel with the SJWs, and in fact, the more they believe those things, the more they trigger people they hate so they can believe in them more. If they really wanted to alleviate their misery and they understood it as a result, as that class action was the only thing that would do it, they wouldn't fucking bring that shit up. And even if they still thought it, it wouldn't matter because they would have to accommodate to organizing into the group. And that would mean that either it would go or they would alienate everybody else and they get kicked out. They would have to choose between actually trying to fix things and holding on to this bullshit. Just like people would have to choose between actually trying to fix things and holding on to the all disagreement is abuse. All experiences should be totally frictionless. No one should ever have any conflict at all. And that I'm going to use that belief to badger everyone else into basically never disagreeing with me. Neither of those are sustainable beliefs in a genuinely effective left-wing organization. At this point, everyone now, like people like to say, oh, look at the UAW, look at all the racists and the old crafts unions. History has moved forward, I'm afraid. And a lot of those problems that shattered the labor movement in the 60s, a lot of them, not all of them, for the love of God, not all of them, but of course not all of them, have been resolved. We are dealing with a fundamentally less instinctively racist population than we'd had to deal with in the 60s. And that means that the people who even are racist can be dealt with as long as they think they can make their lives better through class collaboration. So all of this desire to separate the sheep from the goats and the fascist from the anti-fascist, all of it does is to serve to guarantee that the fewest people are going to make the step from online to the real world. The fewest people are going to want to talk to other people in the real world about politics and try to figure out how to fix things. And the more of them are going to sink all of their fucking jism, all of their nut, all of their orgone, all of their life essence into battling on the etheric plane. Because they get to hold on to their bullshit. They get to hold on to their greasy little center of perverted pleasure. Whether it's a racial fixation, sexual inadequacy brought on by being a gross and unfuckable incel. Or the trauma associated with being a minority that manifests itself in such a way that you cannot countenance. You are so distrustful of non-whites or men if you're a woman that you cannot ever trust their motives in any situation and have to constantly prove to yourself that they're on your side because you fundamentally do not trust them. And I'm not saying that you don't have a good reason not to trust men if you're a woman or white people if you're black. But I'm saying that if you cannot let go of that, make a, say it with me folks, leap of faith sufficient to meet someone that way, a man or a white person halfway, then you will leave. And that's fine. That's the kind of person who should not be part of an organization. But guess what? The bet of Marxism, the bet of socialism, the bet of the human race is that the majority of people, if they properly understand that moment and that choice, will choose to cooperate and will choose to put the greater good above their own. But they have to see evidence that there's a reason to do it, or else it all comes back to the self and the disgusting little jack-off session in your pants. Oh dear, I'm afraid I went off again.